Tout le monde? Bonjour à tous. Hello everyone. So I'm Jeremy from Innovation Time, and today we are with Marc Gruber from EPFL Vice-President for Innovation. That's right?
That's correct, yes.
And we'll talk about innovation together.
Looking forward. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
So, Marc, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get to EPFL and now to lead one of the biggest incubator, I think, in Switzerland?
Exactly. I came here actually to Lausanne in 2005 as a professor for entrepreneurship and technology commercialization. You know, I'm still professor for entrepreneurship and technology commercialization here. And in addition, now I have this other hat of being vice president of innovation and president of our innovation park here. And you're correct, it's a fantastic ecosystem. I come back to that in a minute. But I came here running the Entrepreneurship Center at the University of Munich, doing my habilitation at the University of Munich, and before that I was in Philadelphia and in St. Gallen for my studies. So I came around a bit, and actually I got very fortunate by being in 1999 for a whole year at the Wharton School. They had one of the oldest entrepreneurship centers in the world. And, it was way beyond our European move towards entrepreneurship, and I was lucky to be in an environment where they were teaching entrepreneurship, where they were helping young founders to get on the road. So I got exposed to that fairly early, and then I came back to Europe and was a bit ahead of the wave, and that helped me to create that entrepreneurship center at the University of Munich.
And I think one of the first questions that most of our listeners might actually ask themselves is about how do you teach entrepreneurship and how you go from an academic career into teaching something that today is considered to be some kind of opposite to entrepreneurship.
I think what we do in entrepreneurship research can be extremely helpful for practicing or for doing entrepreneurship. Why? Because what we are studying is, for instance, what serial entrepreneurs are doing, those who have repeatedly started a venture compared to novice ones. This is a very interesting contrast, because when you look at serial entrepreneurs, they are experts in the field. And the novice ones, they are trying it the first time. And when we contrast the two, we can learn a lot about what the experts do relative to the novices. And we can learn from the experts what we should actually teach the novices so that they become experts. And if you think more broadly about this is actually an approach that many other métiers are using. If you want to build a table like this one here, you don't ask me as a novice, you ask the experienced carpenter, how this is done. And that's exactly what we're doing in entrepreneurship research. Of course, there are other ways how we do research in entrepreneurship too. But this gives a very rich basis. We do this not only with 10 companies, but with hundreds, with thousands, with tens of thousands of companies. So we see patterns through research that an individual could never see. And I think that gives us a unique ability to be able to teach a subject where not necessarily we have started 5,000 ventures. But if you look at what medical doctors are doing, they don't have experienced each and every illness to be a good doctor. Rather, they have studied this, they over time get experience by seeing illnesses, and that's basically a similar approach that we have in academia to be able to teach entrepreneurship.
But how do you challenge yourself? How do you keep in touch with what is going on and the real climate out there?
Look, I'm a firm believer that we have research in entrepreneurship or management as such has a solid foundation in the theory and concepts, etc. But it should also be practical, and it should have an implication for how we run businesses, how we run social businesses, how we run entrepreneurial ventures, etc. And my research, and that's partly due to the heritage that I have as an academic, working with Ian McMillan very early on, Hans Hübner and St. Gallen, they were all people who said, okay, we can do research, but it has to have a practical edge, And that's quite interesting then, because you talk with entrepreneurs, you see problems arising, and then you incorporate those questions into your own research agenda, and find conclusions, answers to these problems that the entrepreneur themselves or the entrepreneurs themselves cannot see. And that's, I think, where the really interesting part happens. You contribute to the more general knowledge, but you also can help individual entrepreneurs.
And in your opinion, so what is the biggest challenge entrepreneurs face in 2020? Is it really COVID, or is it something else?
Well, there's a challenge side to it, but also a great opportunity side to it. So it's the challenge is of course COVID and the resulting cash flow problems. If you cannot reach your customers, or your customers are unwilling to spend money because they're insecure about the future development of the economy, about their jobs, of course you have a cash flow problem. So one of the immediate challenges is managing the cash flow. But on the other hand, as an entrepreneur, these times where lots of things change. The business landscape is completely changing. Customer tastes, preferences are changing. Customer needs are changing. Think about all these stores that now have to count how many people are getting into these stores. We have startups here at the university who are producing technology that can help you with this. Of course, they benefit a lot by the changes. And every time when we experience a fundamental change or very profound changes, let's put it this way, in the economy, competitors dropping out, new needs arising, that's a great time for entrepreneurs also to enter.
Okay, and so in terms of challenges, so you talk about cash flow, but we hear quite a lot of time that in the startup world, money isn't really the problem. There are more projects that are dying because they have too much money than not having enough. So how do you see it?
So when I talk about cash flow, it's really the revenue generation, your daily business, and not the fundraising. Of course, with the fundraising part, many of the ventures that have a cash crunch, that basically run out of money because their customer base is not willing to purchase, or they cannot just make customer visits. That was forbidden for a couple of months. Those type of ventures then need to turn to other sources, and that the sources that you mentioned are the business angels or the early stage funds here in Switzerland. Where we actually have plenty. It's at my school here, I initiated several programs to help the early stage startups and from the bachelor and master students to get off the ground, because these people typically lack the money to do early stage product development, market research, etc. So there is money around for this, but it's there are two things. It's one is your cash flow crunch, and then the investor will look at your cash flow problem and say, is this a more fundamental problem? Is this just due to COVID? Or to the circumstances that are produced by COVID, and as a startup, of course, you want to produce cash flow via your revenues, because that's the normal growth engine in a company.
And so, what is has there been a change in behavior for those funding partners and those business angels around here in EPFL at least, because you have some insight?
Yeah, what we typically see when I talk to them is that they have a certain amount of money to spend on their ventures, and if they already have an ongoing portfolio, now they reserve, of course, a bit more money for the ongoing ventures, because they might need additional funding rounds, which means by implication that they have less funds available for new investments. That's one phenomenon that I see. But on the other hand, what we are seeing just in the recent weeks is very big funding rounds of companies that actually benefit in that sense from the crisis, because think everything, digital education, everything that has to do with some kind of medical application linked to COVID, they get a lot of interest, and there's money around to help those companies to do funding rounds in the tens of millions, and that's quite interesting to see.
But those ventures that are so COVID and crisis focused, what are their perspective of growth? So what is your opinion on the way things will unfold after we get a vaccine and everything? Because this situation isn't permanent. And yes, we've seen that there's a lot of money that was coming in into those COVID-related ventures.
Let me illustrate my answer with an example. Everyone knows Logitech. They have been benefiting hugely, of course, due to the crisis, because everyone now needed home office equipment. And take a guess, Logitech has a lot of this, the mouse, the keyboard, the stuff you need at home, okay? And the cameras, etc. What Logitech is doing very well is to say, okay, we have these types of revenue sources that have increased tremendously, but we also reinvest a significant amount into new innovation. So it's not only the view of, well, it's fine now, we are sailing, if you want to use an analogy, a metaphor, we are surfing on the wave, but we are anticipating what comes after that. And I think the really good companies, the really good leaders say, hey, now this is actually a windfall profit that we are making due to this extraordinary circumstances that we have with the crisis, and we should reinvest those funds into our innovation pipeline and make sure that we have the next 2-3 waves of innovation coming to the market when this waves will ebb up due to vaccines, as you say.
So, what should aspiring entrepreneurs do right now? If they are already a venture, or if they are about to start one, what would be your advice?
So, if they are about to start one, I think it's what I always advise is that they should carefully look at the opportunity, what they are trying to do. Okay, it's too much still an attitude of saying let's just do it and then pivot. And even the friends I have in Silicon Valley, they say, hey, this is not what we should do. We should actually take a look. That's actually the book I've written, Where to Play, to understand really well if this is a good environment, a good opportunity to address. And then you would say, okay, there might be other opportunities that have a better characteristic. So one important element for the nascent entrepreneurs during these times of change is really to not jump at the first thing that they see. Okay, for the more advanced entrepreneurs, it's trying to figure out, in a way, what I just illustrated with Logitech, to figure out what the next element will be that could drive the innovation pipeline if the current one is related only to the circumstances of the crisis. But more fundamentally, it's building a growth platform, and saying, okay, we can enter this domain, we can enter that domain. And I think this type of logic, this type of mindset, we see very much in the serial entrepreneurs. They have this growth logic, saying, hey, we can play here, but then we can grow in these other domains. And what I tend to see is that there's too much, of course there's a lot of focus on the current market, because that's the market that creates the revenues. But there's too less focus on what else we could do in the future. I don't want to advocate that people should think a lot about these future markets, but they should keep maybe 5% of their alertness towards the future growth domains. And then you don't fall into the trap that you only have one growth driver, but you can have multiple, you can have a fallback option, you can have future growth option. That makes just a more dynamic, agile firm.
And so, to take the title of your book, how do you know where to play today? Because yes, you need to keep those 5% of your time to think about the future, but today, the 95% else, because there are so many markets and there are so many opportunities actually right now. How do you get to start on the right foot?
So, yeah, it's an excellent question, and I've done research on this question and related questions for the last 20 years. So I've looked at about 5,000 to I think 8,000 startups in total, different tech startups, non-tech startups, and we see a consistent pattern. And the pattern is that the serial entrepreneurs, those who have a lot of experience, they have a different approach. They look at multiple opportunities, they evaluate those. Yeah? You cannot foresee everything, no one has a crystal ball. Yeah? But they say, okay, there are fundamental characteristics in markets that make one market more attractive than another. Think about the size of the market, of course, but also the time it takes to revenues, the strength of the customer needs. Some markets your offering might only be nice to have, in others it's a must-have product, and so on. So what we did is, when I say we, it's my former PhD student, now educated at Technion in Israel, Sharon Tal, and me, we wrote this book, Where to Play, where we actually say, hey, look, first make sure to identify a multiplicity of markets, a portfolio. That's what the serial entrepreneurs are doing. Second, we help you to evaluate those, because we give you a worksheet, and based on more than 50 years of venture capital research, we tell you these are the 6 main factors that define the potential and the challenge inherent in an opportunity. And then you go in there with a more seeing eye. And third, we tell you on which markets you should focus. So it's really a process that helps you to work on the company, which is a strategic decision, a strategic activity. Well, oftentimes, and that comes back to your question, entrepreneurs work in the company because they are called from the customers, they are called from the suppliers, and you're in your daily business and are driven almost to forget that there's a strategic part where you as an entrepreneur design the venture and have the strategic obligation to do so, because if you don't do it, no one does it.
And so to get to your book, you actually have a copy of it.
I have it here, yes.
Yeah. But today, for students or young entrepreneur, there are so many choices of books today. That's a very competitive market too, and most of them might be driven to something like 0 to 1 or anything else by Peter Thiel or Gary Vaynerchuk, where they just talk about their experience. And on the other side, there are books more like yours, if I can say, that are much more academic and not that not with such personal branding around it, to tell it straight away.
Yeah, no, I think you're perfectly right.
Choose those kind of lectures.
No, I think there are books that can serve the purpose of motivating people and saying, wow, there's something happening, and look at the biography of Elon Musk, look at Peter Thiel's book. I think they serve a purpose. Yeah? But on the other hand, I'm a firm believer that you know, if you know one company creation story, this is not like generalizable. You know, you might get inspired by it. You know? But if you know one story, this worked at this point in time for this person. Okay, I'm a much stronger believer in saying, hey, behind this book we have looked at 8,000 companies, and this is what the successful do, this is what the unsuccessful did, you know, and this is what are the patterns that drive this. These are your cognitive biases, and so in that sense, I think there's a market for both books and a purpose for both types of books, and I think they're highly complementary. I just would not say that, you know, people should only read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 and say, hey, that's exactly how I need to do it, because this is also a biased account. This worked for him in Silicon Valley at that time, and you know, nowadays it might not be the same recipe anymore. So it's a singular perspective that can inspire, but that's also what it is.
He brands, for example, but there are so many of them like Peter Thiel and everything. He runs a lifestyle, a method that should and could, in his say, be applied to everything. And in some sense, you're trying to promote.
Can I ask you something in return? Yeah. What would you say in your book if you want to sell books? Of course, this applies to everyone. You know, if I want to sell a book, I know we do it here explicitly and say, hey, this is for the young entrepreneurs. This is for established companies, and we have variations in what is relevant and discuss it openly, okay? Building on the research. If I want to sell a book, you know, I don't want to sell a cookbook, you know, of course I say, hey, this is the new wave, this is what everyone's new taste should be. And honestly, as a researcher, I feel I have an obligation towards my students, towards the readers, to really give them in their hands something solid where I know from research that it works. You know, not only with one person or one startup, but generally it works. You know? And I think this is, you know, that's why initially I thought I could write a book in 3 months. It took us 2 years, because there's a fine line between having a simple framework and a simplistic framework. Okay, and you know, just trust on the worksheet 2 with all the evaluations we spent. I think half a year looking at 50 years of venture capital research. So in essence, I just want to inspire our listeners and viewers to say, hey, there is a place for each book. Some can be extremely inspiring, and it's a lovely read. I read the Peter Thiel book, and when you read it, sometimes I nod my head and say, that's what we knew in research 20 years ago. Sometimes I say, hey, that's an interesting new idea, and sometimes I say, well, that applies to you, but hopefully no one else follows it. But you know, that's the market of book writing. If you talk to a publisher, they want to sell many copies, millions of copies.
Yeah. To switch back to the subject of real entrepreneurship and taking action, there are books and there's also conferences given about entrepreneurship. And my question, straightforward, what should I do if I want to build a startup, say, within 6 months? What steps should I take? From those companies who succeed and those who fail, what's the do's and don'ts to take action today?
If I would be Peter Thiel, I would say, read my book. If I'm an entrepreneurship educator like I am, I say, look, first we have to start with who you are, what's your background. You know, if you're a technology student, my advice will be very different than if you're a management student. You know, as a technology student, this is a completely new thought world here. You know, a startup is about creating customers that then deliver the revenues to you. Okay, this is a world of social markets. You know, this is a world where you need to understand what a balance sheet is, what your cash flow is, etc. You know, what marketing is, what a target market is, what are the characteristics of a good market. You know? These are skills that you typically don't learn in your technological disciplines, and that's normal because you study technology. Okay, so in that sense, if you would be that type of student, I would say, look, you need to really advance your skills in these other domains, or you need to find someone who has these skills who complements the team. Okay, And that's quite different advice to when I would say, hey, you're a team of 2 students already, one is a management person, the other one is a tech person, maybe there's a 3rd person who does marketing, and a 4th person who does finance. I say, well, this is a well-rounded team. If you're in this situation, I would say, look, there you can say, okay, we have these opportunities that we see. I would advise you to pick a good one, figure out, the book is now, the method I developed is now officially part of the Lean Startup approach by Steve Blank as the 4th tool. I would say, look, the Lean Startup approach would be an interesting way for you to learn about your startup. So it's about a learning mode early on. The person that I cited briefly, the tech student, I would say, look, you do a couple of courses, and there's lots of stuff online. You don't have to wait for a university class. There are university classes if you prefer that, but lots of stuff is online. You learn yourself. In the evenings you watch this video, and you do a short mini MBA. You can do this. You understand what a balance sheet is. It's not rocket science, but you still need to understand how it works.
But what's your vision as VP for innovation in terms of those accelerators, such as the one in EPFL and the ones from UNL, and the synergy that can be built? Because here at EPFL, it's focused on technology. That's the point of everything. But at UNL, for example, we have HTC, which is well known today and has been known for years in terms with its own accelerator. That today actually has been rebranded to gather all 7 faculties. And what we can observe is that there are more and more students that are not in technology and not even in business, and that are willing to take their way into entrepreneurship. So what's your vision about that, and has something changed because of this?
Look, in a university setting, and it's both EPFL, University of Lausanne, that's the schools here in Switzerland and across the globe. You have 2 missions there. One is truly to help young people on their entrepreneurial journey, and these incubators, accelerators can help by saying, hey, we provide resources for everything from training to consulting to mentoring to access to the network to providing initial funding, etc. That's one important activity that we help these students, okay? And say, okay, we are here, we make your life a bit easier, okay? The hard thinking still needs to be done by the student. The other part is that we, in the future, will have to have much more entrepreneurial staff in the companies, people who are able to think out of the box, know what it means to have a market, know what it means to think very creatively about problems in a team. And for that reason, I think the incubators, the accelerators at universities serve as a second important purpose. It's an educational one. It's a type of education that you get only in these types of accelerators, in incubators, because you're working on a project. You're challenged to go out there with a client. And let me tell you that the tech students I talk to here say, well, that's a huge learning step for me. It's a very different thought world compared to my tech science-based, engineering-based thought world. If I go out there, do this, get this feedback, and bring it back into the entrepreneurial project. And I do this in a team. And I think these are creativity, teams, leadership, working with others. These are skills that are highly important in the next 20, 30 years, if not longer. And if we can train the students in these important domains, I think that we can really, they benefit from an endowment, a skill endowment that's highly important for their careers.
Thank you very much for your answer, and I think that's something interesting that I'm just waiting to see it take place. Do we have any question maybe from the Instagram live feed?
Yeah.
Anything?
Not yet. It's too early in the morning. Come in the afternoon.
One last word, maybe something you wish I asked you, or you want to talk about something new coming up with the EPFL Innovation Partnership.
No, I think what an important challenge and important opportunity is. It's always both. It's all these startups and ventures related to sustainability and sustainability solutions, and I think this is a very interesting, important activity that young people can engage in. At EPFL, I know that you've done a lot on these fronts as well. At EPFL, I created the Tech for Impact program, where we support proactively the startuppers in this domain. There are 2 important observations here. Number 1, creating a startup in these domains, serve a purpose that is highly important to humanity, to the world oftentimes. what we need to do is that we educate the people so that they are not stumbling into a naive way. You know, saying, I want to help the world, that's why it's justified that I do it. They still have to have a firm vision on how they can execute on their plans. Why? Because, you know, if you are going out there, and let me just pick up a very concrete example, going out there and go to let's say a village in Africa, try to help them, and at the end of the day your solution doesn't work and you leave them worse off. You know, then your whole goal, your whole purpose, why you rather should not have done it, you know? And that's why you have to go in there knowing what your fallback options are. You know, in case it fails, how do you manage that failure so that the people are not hurt because of you, okay? And I think this is a type of obligation that can be managed with certain principles, that can be foreseeable, in part, where you say, okay, I have fallback plans, etc. You also need to manage 3 bottom lines sometimes, you know, and this is an interesting intellectual challenge. But second point here is that when you think about these ventures, we need to also figure out ways to accelerate their impact to the world. You know, a normal venture, you know that very well, it takes maybe 10, 15 years until it has a significant size. Look at how long it took Facebook, Google, etc. to really reach the masses. If we have fantastic solutions in place that could address one or the other sustainability problem, you know, CO2 reduction, etc. What we need to figure out is ways to accelerate, to scale up these ventures, to figure out that we can really put out these solutions to the world in a rapid pace. Because what we all know is that time is running out for us, okay, on many dimensions in sustainability. So we need to figure out novel ways of scaling up these companies, maybe by collaborating with large enterprises that already have an international footprint. I think there are new ways of thinking about this, and one important challenge that we have is to figure out how to best scale up these solutions that truly help.
And so that's the point of the new Sustainability Impact Program?
Partly that, yes, and I will be teaching, and we have that program E4S where we offer a new master program starting next year. Part of my activity is to teach their entrepreneurship course on for-profit, also non-for-profit entrepreneurship, which means no other thing than saying, hey, we don't look only at one bottom line, but we look at multiple bottom lines, which makes it a very interesting intellectual challenge, but also a very important practical activity.
Thank you very much, Dan.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for those who are watching at 8:30 in the morning. Else, I hope you enjoy this podcast with Marc Gruber, Vice-President of EPFL for Innovation. And thank you very much to our partner IFJ, who will help you in building and incorporating your startup along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, with pleasure.